In this video I will be building Verleso, and I guess also technically Noaram, from Expedition 33. Now you might think that only Verleso comes with a dagger and Noaram comes with a gun, but getting to Noaram... I still had an old piece of C75 lying around that was, for one, too short, which is obvious, but also too wide, and I didn't feel like forging everything down to the 30 to 40 millimeter the blade is wide. So I'm doing something that is either brilliant or incredibly stupid. I drilled a hole into the material and then I cut a giant cut into the rest of it, and now I will pretty much heat this end up and bend the entire thing open, so I have a billet half the width but twice the length. And now that both blades are rough ground, the next step is heat treatment. I've created this metal plate that I've attached to the bottom side of the power file, and now it should be able to create a much cleaner surface when grinding. For the guard, I cut out this 10mm piece of steel, then I put it into a vinegar bath because it's a lot of surface to grind off and the scale is very rough on the abrasives. So now I will only use the belt sander to clean this up a little bit and then we can proceed. To get the shape or texture or whatever you want to call it into the handguards, I've decided to try electro etching. The etching process is the same as usual, only difference is I'm doing it outside today because I want to keep working and this will take quite some time if it works at all. Since the results of the electro etch aren't really deep enough and also very splotchy, I will have to refine this shape. Haha! Nice! The discs that sit below the crossguard are pretty much made the same way as the discs that sit above the crossguard, only difference is these are round, the ones above it are octagonal. One thing I'm not sure if I've mentioned yet is that I took an old file and pretty much custom shaped it to get into these small slots, and I'm very pleased with the result. While I'm not entirely sure yet how I will make the handle in the end, I already know that it will have a wooden core, so I will make that now to get the distances right for all the other fittings. I ground the handle bases into shape yesterday, then I had to leave the workshop to let all the wood dust clear out. And now we can continue. For the sword we now have to create 3 more rings. I'm nearly through, that's why it's getting stuck. For the 2 pommels I have something different in mind this time, because the blade is already pretty well balanced and adding a giant lump of steel would just completely throw that off. I want to try to pretty much bend these 2 sheets of metal into cones, much like these paper templates, and then weld them onto a disc. I was about ready to scrap the idea when I was able to hammer out this thing. More on the vise than on the anvil though. And now I have to repeat it with a bigger one and see how that works. These will need a lot of grinding afterwards, but that's not the problem. I hope. For whatever reason I managed to get the second cone into shape as well, so now I just need to put a little weld seam on here. I'm not sure if I have mentioned this yet, but the pommel will be a threaded construction, as it so often is, on my swords.
And for that I need to drill a hole and then tap a thread. Not only is this way of clamping those two pieces together uniquely creative, it also was disturbingly complacent.
As you can see, I was able to cut out this shape roughly with the angle grinder. Now I need to use my hacksaw to connect the lines because I didn't want to grind over the edges. That would ruin the design. Nice. Since cold bending the crossguard wouldn't really work without completely destroying the work I've already put into it, I'm now heating the pieces up, or one of the pieces, and then I'm going to try to bend it on my anvil to the chalk mark I've made. The last thing that needs to be forged is the second half of the handle of the sword, which is made from a piece of pipe. As you can see, all I did was clean up this little pipe piece after cutting it off and then adding some plates to both sides to create a bit of stabilization so it doesn't rattle as much on the tang. And now the next step is to brass plate all the little tiny pieces for the handle because they need to be golden. I've pretty much spent the last 3 days preparing the vinyl templates for the etchings on the blades. Now, you would be forgiven for not knowing that they even exist. The thing is, on the in-game model you barely can see the patterns that are etched into the blade. Luckily for me, the props artist of the game is showcasing images for all the weapons, so I was able to figure out the pattern I have to put on the blades. And now at dawn of the 4th day we're finally ready to etch this blade. For that I've already set up my power supply. The positive is connected to the blade and the negative is connected to a little sponge. At this point all the stressful parts are pretty much over, since the last thing that could have really screwed me over is the placement of the vinyl template on the blade, but that worked out quite nicely. So now we're just going to do this. I see this came out pretty good. Now obviously I have to really clean it up, but I want to do the other side first because there's a chance that some of the salty water will get onto this side and then it will look rusty again. At this point there's still a lot to do on the blades, but I'm still forced to put the final edge grind on now because I can't do that without ruining the paint job afterwards. Parts of the blade are cold blued, but since the dark tone goes down the blade in a gradient, I will use a spray bottle to achieve that. As with all things in life, you would have to engrave somewhat regularly to stay good at it. As you can see, the first two look terrible. After that I somewhat got into the swing of things again, but still not really anything to write home about. At this point my hope is that just like in the game, these are too small to be noticed when looking at the sword, because what can I say about these other than don't look at them. Now for the most sketchy step of the project, I have to color the blade with a golden tinge. I can't really use brass coating here for several reasons. One being that then I would also paint the dark underneath gold again, and that wouldn't work. And also I'm afraid that if I get this blade too hot, it's pretty much ruining the temper. So I'm trying to get it with tempering colors, just hitting the straw yellow where the tempering is still fine. And ideally it looks like in the game. Now they're obviously not perfect, but I'd say they don't look worse than I expected, so that's a win. Next up I'll have to cold blue the cross guards. Now the color black is a bit curious on these handles because they appear in the most random places, to the point where I assume it's mostly shadows, but I at least want to darken those recesses in here. Ultimately I had to use a combination of the cold bluing solution and this stuff, which is pretty much just a cold bluing solution but for brass. Since I couldn't really tell what the handle wrap is supposed to be, I'm literally just taking a piece of fabric and wrapping it around the wooden handle. Now the way we do this: grab some wood glue, put it on here, put this on here, give it a couple seconds to bond. Then we start by tightly wrapping it around. Then some more wood glue. Rub it into the fibers a little bit. And then we just hold it, because this cures rather quickly. Now this isn't really anything highly technical, so I don't know what else to tell you. It's just glue in fabric to a piece of wood. Now there's just one more thing that came up that I want to do before I can assemble the blades. Is that these symbols here in particular are very dull. I pretty much really want them to stand out with their golden color. So I want to do something that Michael Cthulhu did in his Sword of Kalash build. I'm going to clean this up, maybe even these ones down here. Then I will brass coat it, because down here the temper isn't as important as it is near the edge. Then I will cover these symbols with a bit of permanent marker, cold blue it again, and then use acetone to remove the permanent marker, and then it should look really neat.